He had wolf eyes when he threw me against the wall. That wasn't the man I'd known for 50 years anymore. That was a monster born of greed. Good morning, my dears. This is Martha Wilson, 79 years young, with a story I need to share with you all. I'm speaking directly from my small living room in Portland, Oregon, where the coffee is always fresh and the memories aren't always as sweet as the homemade bread I learned to make from my mother. Before diving into this difficult story, I'd like to mention that this channel is hosting another $300 giveaway, and this is your last chance to participate. It's very simple to enter. Just subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, like this video, and comment with something interesting about yourself. Perhaps the city you live in, how many children or grandchildren you have, their names, or anything you'd like to share would be most welcome. So leave your comment now to secure your chance to win $300. I was born right here in Portland in 1946, when the city was still growing up alongside me, developing amidst the lumber industry that made Oregon known throughout the country. My father, George, worked at one of the first fabric stores downtown, the Fabric House, where I learned to love the smell of new cloth and the sound of scissors cutting fabric in a perfect straight line. Our house was in the Selwood neighborhood, a simple wooden home painted light blue with a backyard where Mom planted a little bit of everything: potatoes, green onions, even strawberries, which had been my passion since childhood. We were 5 siblings, 3 girls and 2 boys, and I was the middle child. They say the middle child is the forgotten one, but in our case, Mom made sure everyone received the same attention, the same affection. Childhood was simple but happy. I attended Selwood Elementary School, walking there every day with my metal lunchbox containing a bologna sandwich or a piece of cornbread. I remember my starched uniform, the pleated navy blue skirt that Mom washed and ironed with such care. We didn't have much, but what we had was well cared for, appreciated. I only finished junior high, as they called it back then. I wanted to study more, dreamed of becoming a teacher, but life had other plans. At 17, I started working at the same store as my father, first as a salesgirl, then in the tailoring department, adjusting clothes, doing hems, installing zippers. My hands were always skilled. That's a gift God gave me. It was there, at the Fabric House, that I met Julian. He was 22, with black hair combed with brilliantine, working in the store's administration. When he came into the showroom to deliver a message or check inventory, all the girls would get excited. He was handsome, had a way of speaking that impressed people, used words we didn't know. Our first date was at the 4th of July celebration at the local church. I was with my friends, all dressed up in colorful dresses, ribbons in our hair, excited about the square dance that was about to begin. Julian arrived, wearing that gray suit of his, even though it was a summer celebration. He was always vain, always wanted to show he was different from the other young men. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, miss?" he asked, extending his hand to me, completely ignoring my friends who were giggling nervously. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and excitement. It was the first time a young man had asked me to dance at a party, especially someone like him. Our courtship began that night and followed the rhythm of those times, proper, supervised, with strict curfews. Julian would pick me up on Sundays for church, then we'd walk in the park. Sometimes we'd go to the Laurelhurst Theater, always accompanied by my younger sister, whom Mom sent as our chaperone. He treated me like a princess back then. He'd bring small flowers he picked along the way, save the last piece of chocolate for me, write me little notes that I hid in my Bible. I didn't see the signs, of course. When you're young and in love, you don't notice the red flags that life raises along the path. The first flag came when we discussed my job. We had been engaged for 3 months, planning the wedding, when he said, as if it were nothing, "After we get married, you'll stop working, of course." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I was surprised because I liked my job, felt useful, liked having my own money, little as it was. "But I enjoy working at the store," I replied, confused. His face changed in an instant. It wasn't anger, it was something worse. Disappointment, as if I had failed some important test. "Martha," he said, using my full name as he did when he was serious, "my wife doesn't need to work. What kind of man will others think I am if I let my wife serve in shops? My role is to support the household." I swallowed hard, felt a lump in my throat. My mother had raised me to be obedient, not to make a fuss. A good husband is a blessing from God, she always said. When you find one, hold on tight. I'm sorry, I murmured, lowering my eyes. You're right. The smile immediately returned to his face, his large hand stroking my hair as if I were a child or a pet that had done the right thing. My smart Martha. You'll see. You'll be much happier taking care of our home, our children. We married in 1968, in a simple ceremony at First Baptist Church. My dress was sewn by myself, with lace that Mom had kept since my birth for this day. The reception was in my parents' backyard, with a cake made by my godmother and appetizers that the neighbors helped prepare. The first years of marriage were adjustable, as we say. Julian had his quirks, his rigid schedules, his specific way of wanting things. Shirts ironed just so, coffee neither too hot nor too cold, the house immaculate when he brought colleagues home for dinner, always without prior notice. When he was in a good mood, he was affectionate, brought me small gifts, told me the latest news. When something upset him at work, he'd arrive silent, with that dark cloud hanging over his head. I learned to read the signs, to walk on eggshells on bad days, to be invisible when necessary. We lived in a small 2-story house downtown, near the store where he continued to work. I took care of the house, visited my mother on Tuesday afternoons, attended church, did charity work at the nursing home. A common life, like so many other women of my generation. The baby took time to come. 4 years of trying, praying, making promises to all the saints. I saw friends with their growing bellies, then with babies in their arms, and felt that emptiness that only those who've experienced it understand. Julian became increasingly impatient, as if it were my fault. My mother had 6 children without any effort, he would sometimes say, making me feel even more inadequate. When I finally got pregnant in 1972, it was a joy beyond words. Julian changed completely. He became that attentive young man who had courted me, making plans, painting the baby's room, buying a second-hand crib that he sanded and painted himself. Oliver was born on a rainy April dawn in 1973. A difficult birth, the kind that in those days put the mother's life at risk. I was in labor for 20 hours. The midwife was worried, talking about taking me to the hospital. But he finally came into the world, a strong, rosy boy with dark fuzz covering his little head. "My son," Julian said when he held him for the first time, his voice choked with an emotion he rarely showed. "My boy." Oliver changed our lives. He was a calm baby who nursed well, slept through the night, smiled easily. When he turned 1, Julian had an idea that would change the course of our story. "I'm going to open my own store," he announced one night as we were having dinner. "I'm tired of working for others, of making the boss rich while I take the crumbs." I was concerned. We had our savings, but opening our own business was risky. Portland was growing fast, but competition was also increasing. "Are you sure, Julian? It's a big step." He immediately frowned. "Are you doubting me, Martha? You think I don't have what it takes?" "No, of course not," I quickly replied. "I'm just thinking about Oliver, his security." "That's exactly who I'm thinking about." Julian hit the table so hard that the baby startled in his high chair. "I want to build something for our son, a legacy. I don't want him to be an employee like I was, like your father was his whole life." And so Maynard Fabrics was born, our little store on Main Street, one of the main downtown commercial streets. At first, it was just a small room, with rolls of fabric stacked on shelves, a sewing machine for small adjustments, and me behind the counter, helping when business picked up. Yes, ironically, I went back to work. "It's different," Julian explained. "Now you're helping in our store, building our assets, not serving strangers." The logic was confusing, but I accepted it, happy to get out of the house a bit, to use my knowledge of fabrics and sewing again. The 70s were good to us. The store grew, we expanded to the adjacent property, hired 2 employees. Portland was booming. The economy brought money, and the city was buzzing with people and opportunities. We bought our first house, a 2-story home in Laurelhurst, a neighborhood that was beginning to be considered upper middle class. Oliver grew up strong and intelligent. From an early age, he showed interest in books, in the stories I read before bedtime. At school, he was always at the top of his class, bringing home proud report cards full of high marks that Julian would show off to friends on Sunday after church. But there was tension too. Julian wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, to love the store as he did. Oliver, however, had other interests. He liked science, mathematics, dreamed of university, of horizons beyond that little shop that meant everything to Julian. "This boy has his head in the clouds," Julian would complain when Oliver preferred to read instead of helping at the store on Saturdays. "He needs to learn the value of hard work, of commerce. Books don't fill anyone's stomach." I was caught in this crossfire, trying to please my husband without discouraging my son's dreams. It was a daily tightrope walk, a delicate balance that sometimes leaned more to one side, sometimes to the other. "Let the boy study," I would say when Julian was in a good mood. "He can take care of the administrative part of the store later, do the accounting, organize everything properly with the knowledge he'll have." It was my little strategy to calm the waters, to allow the two worlds to coexist peacefully. It worked sometimes, other times not. On bad nights, Julian would slam the bedroom door, spend hours watching television alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, brooding over what he called the boy's ingratitude. Even so, they were happy years in their own way. We had health, we had comfort, we were a family. Sunday lunches at my mother's house, Christmases with the family gathered, Oliver's graduations that filled my chest with pride. Life followed its predictable course, with its small daily joys and sorrows. I never imagined that an ordinary Tuesday morning in 1997 would change everything forever. Oliver was 24, had graduated in engineering from Portland State University, was engaged to Sandra, a beautiful girl from a good family he met in college. He worked at a large civil construction company, was saving money for the wedding that would happen at the end of that year. The phone rang at 10:43 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I looked at the kitchen clock as I dried my hands on my apron to answer. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Martha Maynard?" asked a formal female voice. "Wife of Mr. Julian Maynard?" "Yes, that's me," I answered, feeling that sinking feeling in my stomach that you get when something is wrong. "This is Portland General Hospital. Could you come immediately? There's been an accident involving your son, Oliver Maynard." The world stopped at that moment. Literally stopped. The air became too heavy to breathe, my legs too weak to support my body. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. "What kind of accident? Is he okay? Can I talk to him?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. That kind of silence that screams truths no one wants to hear. "It's better if you come as soon as possible," was all the woman said. "Your husband has been notified. He's on his way to the hospital." I don't remember how I got there. I know a neighbor drove me, that she was saying things to calm me down, that all I could do was pray. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Repeating the same words, like a mantra that could change what I already knew in the depths of my heart. Oliver had suffered an accident at the construction site where he was supervising a project. A poorly placed beam, a scaffolding that gave way, a fall of almost 50 feet. Instantaneous death, the doctor said later, as if it were some consolation, knowing that my son, my only son, didn't suffer in his final moments. Julian was already there when I arrived, sitting in a plastic chair in the hallway, his face buried in his large hands, his broad shoulders shaking in silent sobs I had never seen before. In 29 years of marriage, I had never seen my husband cry like that. I approached slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal, and touched his shoulder. He raised his face, eyes red, swollen, the lost look of someone who doesn't recognize the world around them. "Martha," he said simply, his voice breaking on the second syllable. And then he hugged me tightly, as if I were a lifeline in the middle of a stormy sea. We stayed like that, embracing in a hospital corridor, two middle-aged people crying over the loss that no parent should face. A nurse approached after some time, asked if we wanted to see the body. I nodded, knowing that image would stay with me for the rest of my days. His face was serene, almost as if he were sleeping. They had cleaned the blood, closed his eyes, crossed his hands over his chest. He looked like my boy, and at the same time a stranger, an empty shell of what was once my son. I ran my hand through his dark hair, still soft like when he was a child, and silently promised that somehow I would survive this pain. For him, for his memory. Julian remained at the door, unable to approach, unable to touch his son, who no longer breathed. I saw something break inside him at that moment, something that would never be fixed. The wake, the funeral, the days that followed. It all seems like a blur in my memory. The constant visits, the plates of food that kind neighbors would leave, the hugs, the words of consolation that went in one ear and out the other without making any sense. How do you keep living after burying a child? How do you wake up in the morning? How do you breathe? How do you put one foot in front of the other and continue existing in a world where your child no longer exists? These are questions I carry to this day, questions that perhaps will never have answers. Julian and I dealt with grief in different ways. I clung to faith, went to church every day, lit candles, prayed until my knees hurt on the hard kneeler. He withdrew, stopped going to the store, spent entire days in what had been Oliver's room, looking at photo albums, holding his son's graduation gown as if he could extract from it some remnant of life. Sandra, Oliver's fiancée, would come to visit us occasionally. It was painful and comforting at the same time to see that young woman who had loved my son so much, who would have been my daughter-in-law, mother to my grandchildren who would now never be born. She ended up moving to Seattle a few months later. She couldn't stand the memories anymore, the broken plans, the pitying looks from people on the street. It was about 3 months after the burial that I noticed the change in Julian. He started getting up early again, shaving every day, going to the store. He seemed to be coming out of the dark pit he had fallen into. I was relieved at first, thinking we were finding a new normal, a way to move forward carrying our pain like a permanent scar, but no longer an open wound. I was wrong. It wasn't acceptance motivating Julian. It was something much darker, which I only discovered that August night when he returned from the store later than usual, smelling of whiskey and with a strange gleam in his eyes. "We need to talk, Martha," he said, sitting at the kitchen table while I finished washing the dinner dishes he had barely touched. "About the future of the store." I dried my hands on my apron, confused. "What about the store, Julian?" "It's all we have," he replied, his voice low, intense. "Everything we built in life. It was supposed to be Oliver's one day, was supposed to stay in the family." I nodded, feeling tears return to my eyes at the mention of my son's name. "I know. But now we have no one to leave it to," he completed, banging his fist on the table. "No one to continue the Maynard name, no one to inherit what I built with so much sacrifice." "We could sell it later when we're older," I suggested, not understanding where he was going with this. "Or donate to some charity, in Oliver's name." He laughed, a bitter sound, without humor. "Sell? Donate? Have you gone crazy, woman? That store is my life, my blood, my sweat. It's not going into the hands of strangers." I sat at the table across from him, increasingly concerned about the direction of this conversation. "What do you suggest then, Julian?" He looked at me in a way he never had before. A calculating, cold look that made me shudder. "We need another child," he declared simply, as if announcing we needed to buy bread or change a burnt-out light bulb. I blinked several times, sure I had misheard. "What did you say?" "You heard me. We need another child. A boy, preferably. Someone to leave the store to continue the family name." I felt a wave of nausea come over me. Julian was 55 at the time I was 51. Well beyond the age of having children, even if we didn't consider the recent grief, the devastating loss we still hadn't processed. "Julian, that's crazy," I said quietly, as if trying to calm a child in the middle of a tantrum. "We can't replace Oliver, and I can't have any more children. You know that. I had a hysterectomy at 40, after serious problems with fibroids. Julian knew this. He was by my side at the hospital, took care of me during recovery. There are other ways," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "We could adopt, or what, Julian?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "Or find a younger woman who can bear a child for us, for me." It was like being slapped in the face. I was speechless, breathless, groundless. "Are you telling me you want to find another woman? That you want to leave me after everything we've been through together? After losing our son?" He shook his head, impatient. "Don't be dramatic, Martha. I'm not talking about leaving you. I'm talking about finding Solution to our problem. The girl wouldn't even need to know who I am. It could be through insemination. I stood up suddenly, my legs wobbly from shock and indignation. You've had too much to drink, Julian. You're talking nonsense. Go to sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. I turned my back and started walking out of the kitchen, but I felt his hand grab my arm forcefully, making me turn back. I'm not finished talking, Martha, he said, his fingers squeezing my skin so hard they would leave marks. And it was there, on that hot August night, that the nightmare began that would forever change my life. A nightmare much worse than I could have imagined, even in my darkest moments of grief for the son who had departed. My dear ones who have followed me this far, a mother's heart that has lost a child never completely heals. It's like losing a piece of your soul that never returns. But what happened after that night? That was the beginning of a hell I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And I'll tell you about that in the next part of this story, if God gives me the strength to continue remembering these painful moments. I never imagined that pain could have a smell, but it does. It smells like damp earth, withering flowers, and new coffin wood. It's a smell that sticks to your clothes, your hair, your nostrils. A smell I've carried with me for over 20 years. That morning, as the orderlies prepared my Oliver's body for the wake, I sat in a hospital waiting room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the rosary that my friend Doris had placed between my fingers. Pray, Martha. It's all we have left now, she said. And I tried. I swear I tried, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if God had suddenly gone deaf, or I had lost my soul's voice. The wake was held at Pine Grove Cemetery Chapel, the one right at the entrance. It seemed like the entire city passed through there. Oliver's college classmates, childhood friends, neighbors, store customers, professors from Portland State who spoke of his potential, the brilliant future he had ahead of him. Each compliment was a knife in my chest. Each condolence hug, a confirmation that this wasn't a nightmare, it was real. Sandra, his fiancée, arrived in the afternoon, supported by her mother. Poor girl. She looked like a ghost, pale, red-eyed from crying so much, still wearing the engagement ring Oliver had given her at Christmas. When our eyes met, we collapsed into each other's arms. No words were needed. We were two women who loved in different ways the same man who now lay in that dark wooden coffin, wearing a navy blue suit and a tie that I myself had given him on his last birthday. He was so happy yesterday, Sandra whispered between sobs, making plans for our apartment, talking about starting to look after the wedding. I stroked her hair, unable to respond. What could I say? That plans don't matter anymore? That the future they dreamed of together evaporated on an ordinary Tuesday morning? The burial was the following afternoon. The Portland sky was offensively blue, without a single cloud, the sun shining as if it were an ordinary day. How could the world keep turning, the sun shining, birds singing, when my son was being lowered into a dark grave? Julian stayed by my side the whole time, his arm around my shoulders, holding me when my legs weakened. He was in shock, his eyes fixed on the coffin as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He didn't cry in front of anyone. Only later, at home, in the darkness of our bedroom, did I feel his body shake with silent sobs that lasted all night. The days that followed were a blur. People bringing food I couldn't eat, the pastor visiting, talking about acceptance, about God's plans that we cannot comprehend. As if there were any divine plan that would justify the death of a 24-year-old young man, full of dreams and goodness. Sandra came almost every day at first. We would sit on the porch, looking at the rose bushes that Oliver had planted for me on Mother's Day, 2 years earlier. Sometimes we talked about him, remembering funny things he had done, plans he had shared. Other times, we sat in silence, each lost in her own grief. I can't look at the wedding dress anymore, she told me one day, her hand squeezing a handkerchief already damp with tears. Mom said we should keep it, that one day I'll want to wear it. But how can I marry someone else, Mrs. Maynard? How will I love someone after him? I hugged that girl who would have been my daughter-in-law, who would have given me grandchildren, who would have grown old alongside my son, and I had no answer. I myself wondered how I would continue living in a world without my son's smile, without hearing his voice calling me Mom, without the smell of aftershave he left in the bathroom on Sunday mornings. My mother, who at the time was already 76, as strong as she had always been, came to stay with me for a few weeks. She, who had already buried my father and two of my brothers, knew the pain that consumed me. She didn't try to console me with platitudes, didn't say that time heals all wounds, that God knows what He's doing. She was simply there, making the breakfast I didn't eat, opening the windows to let the sun in, gently forcing me to shower, to change clothes, to take small steps back toward life. "One day at a time, daughter," she would say, brushing my hair as she did when I was a girl. "Today you just need to breathe. Tomorrow, breathe again." Meanwhile, Julian closed the store for 2 weeks. Then he went back, saying he needed to occupy himself, that staying at home was driving him crazy. He started coming home late, smelling of whiskey. He wasn't a drinker before, maybe a beer on Sunday with the barbecue, nothing more. Now the bottle of whiskey in the kitchen cabinet emptied quickly. "You need to stop this," I said one night, when he stumbled to bed, so drunk he could barely take off his shoes. "This won't bring Oliver back." He looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his face contorted in an expression that mixed anger and pain. "Nothing will bring him back, Martha. Nothing. So let me forget in whatever way I can." How could I argue with that? I myself wanted to forget, if only for a few hours. Forget the coffin descending into the earth, my boy's pale face, dreams destroyed in an instant. 2 months after the burial, Sandra came to say goodbye. She had secured a transfer at the company where she worked, was going to the Seattle branch. "I can't stay here anymore, Mrs. Maynard," she explained, her eyes downcast as if she felt ashamed. "Everything reminds me of him. The university, the mall where we used to go, even the bus stop where he used to wait for me. It's like every corner of Portland holds a memory that now hurts too much." I understood perfectly. Part of me envied the possibility she had to start over somewhere else, away from the memories. I didn't have that option. My life, my home, my husband, everything was there, intertwined with memories of my son. In the 3rd month, Julian started talking about the store. Obsessively. It was as if that small fabric business had become the only thread connecting him to sanity. "I worked 30 years building this," he would repeat, sometimes in the middle of dinner without the subject having come up. "30 years, Martha. Who will it go to now? To whom?" "We can think about that later," I would respond, trying to calm him. "We still have time. Maybe some nephew will be interested, when they're older." He would shake his head, dissatisfied. "It's not the same thing. I wanted a son there. Someone with our blood, our name." The obsession grew. Julian would spend hours at the store long after closing time. Sometimes I would find him sitting in the dark, just looking at the fabric shelves, at the counter where Oliver used to play as a child. On one of these nights, he came back different. There was a strange gleam in his eyes, a nervous energy that immediately put me on alert. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, downed it in one go, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I had an idea today," he announced, his voice a bit slurred from the drink. "A solution to our problem." "What problem, Julian?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "The store, Martha, our legacy. We can't let it die with us." I sighed, tired of this circular conversation. "We've already talked about this. We don't have other children, unfortunately. But maybe someday, when we're ready, we could think about selling to someone who will take good care of it, who will keep the name." "No." He hit the table hard, making the glass jump. "I won't sell. I won't hand over to strangers what I built with so much sacrifice." I remained silent, waiting for the storm to pass, as it always did when he drank too much and became aggressive. "We need another child," he finally said, looking at me with an intensity that made me swallow hard. My first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity of it. I was 51, hadn't menstruated for several years, had undergone a hysterectomy after serious problems with fibroids. Besides, the idea of replacing Oliver, of having another child as if he were a replacement part, was revolting. "Julian, you know that's impossible," I replied with all the calm I could muster. "I can't have any more children, and even if I could, it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be right." He stood up, stumbling a bit, and began pacing back and forth across the kitchen. "There are other ways, Martha. We could adopt a child. Or Find a young, healthy woman who could have a child for us. I felt my stomach turn. What are you saying? That you want to find another woman? That you want to leave me after more than 30 years together? He shook his head, impatient. Don't be stupid. I'm not talking about leaving you. I'm talking about finding a surrogate. Someone who has the baby and gives it to us to raise. This is madness, I said, standing up too. Complete madness. You've had too much to drink, Julian. Go to sleep. Tomorrow you'll realize the absurdity of what you're saying. I turned my back to leave the kitchen, but felt his hand grab my arm forcefully, his fingers sinking into my flesh. I'm not finished talking, he growled, turning me around roughly to face him. At that moment, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was no longer pain, no longer grief. It was a cold, calculating obsession that made me feel fear for the first time in all those years of marriage. Let me go, Julian, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You're hurting me. He looked at his own fingers squeezing my arm as if he hadn't realized what he was doing, and released me. I backed away a few steps, rubbing the red mark that was already forming on my skin. I'm sorry, he muttered, running his hand over his tired face. I didn't mean to. It's just that you don't understand, Martha. I need this. I need an heir for the store. It's all I have left. And me? I asked, my voice trembling with indignation. Am I nothing? 32 years of marriage mean nothing? He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that empty, distant expression, as if we were speaking different languages, as if he could no longer reach me across the abyss that Oliver's death had opened between us. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in decades of marriage. Or rather, I tried to sleep. I stayed awake looking at the ceiling, his words echoing in my head. One way or another, you'll change your mind. What did he mean by that? What was he planning? I called my younger sister, the only one still alive, living in Tacoma. I told her everything. Oliver's death, Julian's growing obsession, the veiled threats. Come here, Martha, she suggested, concern evident in her voice. Stay with me for a while until things calm down. He seems beside himself. I considered the offer. It would be a relief to leave that house that now seemed like a prison, away from that man I no longer recognized. But something was holding me back. Perhaps a misplaced sense of duty, of loyalty to a marriage of so many decades, or perhaps just the deep exhaustion that grief had installed in my bones, making the idea of any movement, any change, too exhausting to contemplate. I'll be fine, I replied, not believing my own words. He's just suffering. It will pass. My sister didn't insist, but made me promise I would call every day, that I would maintain constant contact. Anything strange, you call me. No matter what time. When Julian returned that night, he was calmer, almost normal. He asked about my day, commented on the weather, as if the explosion of the night before had never happened. He didn't mention children, adoption, clinics. I felt a cautious relief, hopeful that perhaps, just perhaps, he had given up on that absurd idea. Days passed, turning into weeks. Life seemed to resume an almost normal rhythm. Julian would go to the store, I would take care of the house, visit my friend Doris on Wednesdays, go to church on Sundays. We talked little about Oliver. His name was a wound that still bled too much to be constantly touched. The only unusual thing was that Julian started bringing me gifts. Small things at first. Chocolates I liked, a plant for the porch, a cookbook, then bigger things. A new set of pots and pans, a dress he saw in a shop window, an imported perfume. Gifts that would have pleased me before, but that now received a mechanical, suspicious thank you. One day, he arrived with a jewelry box. Inside, a pair of pearl earrings with small diamonds around them. They're beautiful, I said, genuinely surprised. But what's the occasion? He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Do I need an occasion to please my wife? Something in his tone, in the way he said, my wife, left me uneasy. There was a possessiveness there, an intention I couldn't completely decipher. At night, when he lay down beside me, I had returned to the master bedroom after weeks in the guest room. I realized he had been drinking. Not much, just enough to loosen his tongue, to lower his guard. You look so beautiful today, Martha, he murmured, running his hand over my face in a way he hadn't done in a long time. Still so young. I'm 51, Julian, I replied. uncomfortable with the direction of that conversation. "I'm far from young." "But you're still an attractive woman," he insisted, his hand now moving down my neck, my shoulder. "A desirable woman." That's when I understood. The gifts, the compliments, the sudden display of affection, they weren't gestures from a repentant husband for the harsh words. They were part of a plan, his plan to make me change my mind. "I'm tired, Julian," I said, turning to my side with my back to him. It was a long day. I felt his hand pause in the air, hesitant. Then a frustrated sigh. "You're always tired lately, aren't you? Always have an excuse." I didn't answer. I pretended to sleep, my eyes open in the dark, my heart beating fast in my chest. The understanding of what he was trying to do, win me back, seduce me, then propose again the idea of another child, left me disgusted, outraged, as if our relationship, our marriage of so many years, could be reduced to a transaction, a negotiation where my body was just a bargaining chip. The next morning, he left early as always, but not before hugging me from behind as I prepared coffee, his hands trying to find their way inside my nightgown. "Julian." "No," I said firmly, moving away. "This isn't the time." "When will it be the time then?" he asked, frustration evident in his voice. "It's been months, Martha, months." "We're in mourning," I replied simply. "Our son died." "And life goes on," he retorted, grabbing his coffee cup with unnecessary force. "We can't stop living." I didn't respond. There was no response to give. For him, continuing to live meant replacing Oliver, generating another heir for his precious store. For me, it meant just breathing day after day, carrying the pain as a constant companion, learning to live with the emptiness that would never be filled. At the end of that week, Julian came home later than usual. He was agitated, his eyes shining with that same feverish energy that had immediately put me on alert before. "I have a surprise," he announced, sitting beside me on the couch where I was watching the evening news. "I booked a weekend for the two of us, at a lodge in Cannon Beach, to celebrate our wedding anniversary. Our anniversary was still 2 months away, but I didn't mention that. I just looked at him, trying to decipher what was behind those eyes I once knew so well. "I don't know if I'm ready for a trip, Julian," I responded cautiously. "I still feel fragile." "That's exactly why we need to go," he insisted, taking my hands in his. "To reconnect, Martha. To remember who we were before all this. Just the two of us, like in the beginning." There was a genuine plea in his voice that almost convinced me. Almost made me believe it was really about us, about healing our marriage fractured by tragedy. But then his eyes shifted, just for a second, and I saw something calculating, something premeditated that destroyed any hope that his intentions were pure. "I'll think about it," I replied, withdrawing my hands from his. "I'm not promising anything." He nodded, apparently satisfied that I hadn't refused outright. He stood up, announcing he was going to take a shower, and went upstairs whistling softly. A sound so incongruous with the grief we supposedly carried that it gave me chills. As soon as he left, I picked up the phone and called my sister. I told her about the gifts, the advances, the invitation for the trip. "Don't go," she said immediately, her voice laden with concern. "I don't like any of this, Martha. He's plotting something." "I think so too," I agreed, speaking softly so Julian couldn't hear me from upstairs. "I think he's still obsessed with the idea of another child." "But that's crazy. You're 51. You can't get pregnant anymore." "He knows that. I think he's trying to convince me to accept the idea of a surrogate, or adoption, or whatever." My sister was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was serious, measured. "Martha, listen. You need to get out of there. Come to Tacoma. Stay with me for a while. This man is not in his right mind." Once again, I considered the offer. Once again, something prevented me from accepting. A mixture of fear of the unknown, of guilt for abandoning a marriage of so many years, and perhaps more frightening, a morbid curiosity about how far Julian would go with this obsession. "I'll be fine," I repeated, the same empty words as before. "I just need to be firm, make it clear that I won't give in. If you change your mind, at any time, call me. I'll come get you personally." I thanked her and hung up, my heart heavy with dark presentiments I couldn't completely name. Something was about to happen, something that would change the course of my life forever. I could feel it in the air, in the way the house seemed to whisper warnings I couldn't fully understand. That night, lying beside Julian, I pretended to sleep again as he snored softly. I looked at the dark ceiling, the shadows dancing on the walls, and wondered how we had gotten here, how the young love we once felt, the promises exchanged at the altar, the life built side by side for more than 30 years, had transformed into this nightmare of manipulation and fear. And more importantly, I wondered how I would escape if things got worse, where I would go, what I would do, how I would rebuild my life at 51, widowed of a son, with a husband I no longer recognized, questions that would remain unanswered that night, but that fate would take charge of answering in the cruelest way possible in the days to come. Those who see these wrinkled hands of mine today can't imagine the strength they've had to have. Hands that rocked a child, that sewed dreams in fabric scraps, and that one day had to fight for their own survival. Everything began to change on that Thursday, almost 5 months after we buried Oliver. I woke up with Julian watching me. It wasn't a look of affection. It was something calculating, like a chess player planning his next move. I pretended not to notice, got up and headed to the kitchen as I did every morning. I prepared the strong coffee he liked, the buttered toast, set them on the table as I had done for the last 32 years. Routine in those days was the only thing keeping me functioning. I decided we're going to Cannon Beach next weekend, he announced as he buttered his toast. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I've already paid for the lodge, no refund. I felt my stomach sink. I had managed to postpone that trip for 2 weeks, always with a different excuse: headache, plans with Doris, a novena at church. But it seemed the excuses had run out. Julian, I don't know if I'm ready for a leisure trip, I tried to explain, my hands gripping the coffee cup with unnecessary force. I still don't feel well. That's exactly why we need to go, he insisted, his voice too smooth, too fake, to change the scenery, to reconnect. That word, reconnect, sent a chill down my spine. I knew exactly what he meant by it. It wasn't about healing. It wasn't about our marriage. It was about that sick obsession with a new heir, which continued to grow like a tumor inside him. Julian, please, I tried one last time. Let's wait a little longer. Maybe on our wedding anniversary, 2 months from now. No! He hit the table so hard that the coffee cup jumped, spilling the dark liquid on the white tablecloth. Enough waiting, Martha. We've been in this limbo for months. I want my wife back. I want my life back. I remained silent, shocked by the sudden outburst. His eyes, bloodshot, fixed on mine, contained something that went beyond anger. It was a feverish desperation, a need that bordered on madness. All right, I finally gave in, more out of fear than willingness. We'll go this weekend. The smile that spread across his face was disturbing. It wasn't genuine joy. It was satisfaction at having won, at having managed to bend my resistance. It'll be good for us, you'll see, he said, getting up and giving a kiss on the top of my head, as if I were a child who had finally behaved well. As soon as he left for the store, I called my sister. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He's insisting on this trip, Lucy, I explained, my voice almost failing. He's already paid, said there's no way to cancel. I have to go. I don't like this at all, Martha. Her concern was palpable, even through the phone line. Something's wrong here. Why this sudden obsession with a trip? I think he wants to, try to convince me about that idea of another child, I confessed, lowering my voice as if the walls could hear. He thinks that if we can be together again, I'll soften, I'll accept. Martha. Her voice became even more serious. You need to be clear with him. Tell him it's not going to happen, that there's no possibility. I've tried, Lucy. He doesn't listen. It's like there's a wall between us, like he can't hear me anymore. After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen chair and cried. I cried for the son I had lost, for the husband I no longer recognized, for the life that had been shattered on an ordinary Tuesday morning. It was as if I were mourning 2 people, Oliver, who had departed forever, and Julian, who was still physically present, but whose soul seemed to have been replaced by something cold and calculating that I didn't know. The days leading up to the trip were a test of nerves. Julian went back to being attentive, almost exaggeratedly so. He would come home with flowers, ask about my day, call from the store just to say he was thinking of me. If I didn't know the reason behind that sudden kindness, I would have been moved. On Friday, we left for Cannon Beach early. The car journey was silent, with Julian concentrated on the road and me looking out the window, watching the landscape change, the farms of Oregon giving way to more open fields, the vast sky stretching above us like a silent threat. The lodge was beautiful, I had to admit. Small, cozy, with rooms that faced a well-maintained garden. Ours was at the end of a stone corridor, away from the others. For more privacy, Julian explained, with a smile that was intended to be charming, but only left me more apprehensive. I spent the afternoon avoiding being alone with him. I suggested we explore the town, visit the beach the next day, anything that would keep us in public spaces, away from the forced intimacy he so desired. We dined at a restaurant near the lodge. Julian ordered wine, insisted that I drink too. To relax, he said, filling my glass for the third time. I took only small sips, pretending to enjoy it more than I actually was drinking. Something told me to keep a clear head, alert senses. When we returned to the room, he went to take a shower. I heard the shower running and took the opportunity to call Lucy, just to let her know we had arrived safely. But Julian's cell phone, which he had left charging on the bedside table, rang. Reflexively, I looked at the screen. Dr. Marcus, Fertility Clinic, flashed on the screen. My blood ran cold. Fertility? What was that about? I knew he had researched clinics, but I hadn't imagined he had gone so far as to consult doctors, make appointments. When he came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, I tried to act normally, but he must have noticed something in my face, in the way I avoided looking directly at him. What's wrong, Martha? He asked, approaching the bed where I was sitting, pretending to read a lodge magazine. Nothing, I replied too quickly. Just tired from the trip. He looked at the cell phone on the bedside table, then at me. I realized the exact moment he understood what had happened. You saw. It wasn't a question. You saw the call. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He sat on the edge of the bed, the towel still wrapped around his waist, droplets of water running from his graying hair to his shoulders. I was going to tell you when we got back, he said, his voice too calm for my taste. I found a clinic that works with egg donation and surrogacy. The doctor said my sperm is still viable, despite my age. We can have a child, Martha, a boy preferably. To continue our name, to inherit the store. The way he spoke, so casual, so disconnected from reality, made me sick. As if we weren't talking about a life, a human being, but about an object, an insurance policy for his precious business. I won't do this, Julian, I said, each word measured, clear. I won't participate in this crazy plan. I won't help you order a child as if it were merchandise. He was silent for a few seconds, just looking at me. When he spoke again, his voice had a different tone, lower, colder. I don't need your permission, Martha, he said, getting up and heading toward the suitcase to get some clothes. It's already all arranged. The egg donor has already been selected, the woman who will carry the baby too. I just need to do my part now. I was so shocked that for a moment I couldn't respond. Had he planned all this behind my back? Had he made all these decisions without even consulting me? You've lost your mind, I finally said, my voice shaking with indignation. Completely lost your mind. You can't do this, Julian. You can't bring a child into the world like this, with this sick obsession. He put on a t-shirt and shorts, mechanical movements, as if we were having a perfectly normal conversation. It's just a commercial arrangement, Martha, he explained, as if speaking to a particularly slow child. The woman needs money. We need a child. Everyone wins. We need a child? I repeated, my voice rising in volume. Don't include me in this madness, Julian. I don't want another child. I don't want to raise a baby at 51. And mainly, I don't want to participate in this immoral scheme you've concocted. He turned to me then, and there was something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Something cold, calculating, almost inhuman. Yes, you will, Martha, he said, his voice low and controlled. You will raise this boy as your son. You will love him. You will support this decision. You know why? I remained silent, my heart beating so hard I thought he might hear it. Because if you don't do this, I'll leave you with nothing, he continued, approaching the bed again. The house is in my name. The store is in my name. The car, the bank accounts, everything. What do you have, Martha? What would become of you without me, without my money? An old woman of 51, without a profession, without her own house, without anything. His words hit me like physical blows, because deep down, I knew they were true. I never had anything in my name. I had abandoned my job when we got married because he insisted. I had spent my life as Julian Maynard's wife, without my own identity, without financial independence. You wouldn't do that, I murmured, more to convince myself than really believing. Not after 32 years together. He smiled, a smile without humor, without warmth. Try to contradict me, and find out. At that moment, a terrible clarity came over me. The man in front of me was no longer the Julian I knew, that I loved. He was a stranger, a monster created by obsession, by greed, by the desperation to preserve his legacy at any cost. I want to leave, I said, getting up and starting to pack my things in the suitcase I had barely unpacked. Now, I want to go back to Portland. He didn't move to stop me, just continued to observe me with those cold, calculating eyes. Go ahead, he said, sitting in the room's armchair. The car has the keys in the ignition. But remember what I said, Martha. Think carefully before doing anything foolish. I grabbed my suitcase, my purse, and left the room without looking back. I crossed the lodge's garden almost running, ignoring the curious look from the receptionist. The car was parked exactly where Julian had left it, the keys in the ignition, as he said. For a moment, I considered taking the car and leaving, driving to Portland, or better, to Tacoma, to my sister's house, starting over, facing whatever came next. But something stopped me. Fear, perhaps, or the cold reality that he was right. I had nothing, no security, no way to support myself. And at 51, after a life as a housewife, what would my chances be? I returned to the room, dragging my feet like a condemned person on the way to the scaffold. Julian was still in the same position, as if he knew I would return. Wise decision, he commented, without looking directly at me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs shaking too much to support me. What exactly do you want from me? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. I want you to accept this new child as your son. I want you to pretend to the world that he's our adopted son, that we create this story together. And I want you to stop sabotaging me in this project. And if I can't? The tears I had held back until then finally overflowed. What if I can't pretend, Julian? What if I can't love this child that you're buying? He rose from the armchair and came to me, kneeling to be at the level of my eyes. For a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I knew, of the man I once loved. You will, Martha, he said, wiping a tear from my face with his thumb. Because you have a good heart. You always have, and deep down, you'll understand that this is necessary. As if replacing our dead son were a necessity, like water or food. As if generating an heir for that store were more important than respect, than dignity, than the love we once shared. I lay down that night curled up in the corner of the bed, as far away from him as possible, feeling more alone than ever, even with another body inches from mine. I cried silently, tears wetting the pillow, my entire body aching with a pain that went far beyond the physical. The rest of that weekend was a blur of tense moments, superficial conversations, and a distance that seemed to increase with each hour. We visited Haystack Rock like ordinary tourists, took photos, ate at expensive restaurants. The appearance of normality, of a middle-aged couple enjoying a romantic weekend, was so false it was grotesque. On the drive back to Portland, Julian talked about the next steps, about the date he should go to the clinic, about how the procedure would work, about how long it would take until the baby was born. He spoke like a businessman discussing a project, numbers, deadlines, investments. Not a word about love, about family, about the true meaning of having a child. I nodded mechanically, looking out the window, watching my life, my autonomy, my dignity disappear in the dust of the road. When we arrived home, A silent decision had already been made within me. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't live in that farce, in that emotional prison that my marriage had become. The next day, Julian returned to his routine as if nothing had happened. He went to the store early, would return late as always. As soon as he left, I called Lucy. "I need your help," I said as soon as she answered. Without preamble, without greetings. "Things are worse than we thought." I told her everything. The fertility clinic, Julian's plan, the veiled threats about leaving me with nothing. "My God, Martha," her voice trembled with indignation. It's blackmail. It's abuse. You need to get out of there right now." "And go where, Lucy? With what money?" "He was right about one thing. I have nothing in my name. Nothing. Come here. Stay with me until we sort this out. We can find a lawyer, see what your rights are." The idea of confronting Julian in a courtroom, of exposing our private life, our distorted grief, terrified me. But what was the alternative? "I'll think about it," I replied, without committing. "I need to organize some things first. See what I can do." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the yellow walls I had chosen so many years ago, at the cabinets Julian had installed with his own hands, at the small details that made that house our home. And I thought about how everything had changed, how that place that had been my refuge had transformed into a prison. The days that followed were a strange limbo. Julian was satisfied, thinking he had won, that I had accepted his crazy plan. I pretended to agree, while secretly trying to find a way out, a way to regain control over my own life. I started researching when he wasn't home, about my rights as a wife, about separation, about alimony. The information I found wasn't encouraging. Yes, theoretically, I would be entitled to half the assets acquired during the marriage. But in practice, with everything in his name, with the possibility of him hiding assets, of claiming the store predated the marriage. A week after the trip, Julian came home more agitated than usual, his eyes shining with that same feverish energy I had seen before. "It's set," he announced, throwing his jacket over the sofa. "Next Tuesday. The clinic is all prepared. The egg donor has already started treatment." I felt a knot in my stomach, the reality of the situation hitting me with renewed force. It wasn't just a crazy idea, a passing obsession. It was really happening. He was really going to go through with that plan, with or without my approval. "Julian," I tried one last time, gathering all the courage I still had left. "Please, think carefully. This isn't right. This isn't how you bring a child into the world." He looked at me with impatience, as if I were a stubborn child disrupting his important plans. "We've already discussed this, Martha. The decision is made. You can participate and continue to be my wife, or you can oppose and face the consequences." The threat was there, crystal clear, even if not explicitly stated. I swallowed hard, nodding mechanically, while inside me something broke. The last hope that the man I loved still existed somewhere inside that stranger my husband had become. In the days leading up to the appointment, Julian was strangely happy. He hummed around the house, brought small gifts, talked about plans for the future, a future that included that yet-to-be-conceived child, that heir so desired for his precious store. I, on the other hand, sank deeper and deeper into a well of silent desperation. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I spent hours looking at photos of Oliver, silently asking forgiveness for not having been able to protect his memory, for being about to participate in that grotesque farce his father had orchestrated. The night before the appointment, Julian came home from the store later than usual. I immediately noticed that something was different. There was a strong smell of alcohol emanating from him. His eyes were red, his walk slightly staggering. "Celebrating in advance?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. He smiled, a crooked, drunken smile. "Why not? It's a big day, Martha. The day we start over. The day we ensure the Maynard name will continue." I went to the kitchen, trying to escape that conversation, that suffocating proximity. But he followed me, sitting heavily in a chair while I pretended to busy myself washing dishes that were already clean. "You know what I thought today?" he began, his voice slurred by alcohol. "I thought that maybe it was better this way, better that Oliver is gone. I turned abruptly, wet hands, heart beating so hard it seemed to want to come out through my mouth. "What did you say?" He shrugged, pouring himself another glass of whiskey he had brought from the living room. He was never interested in the store. You know that. Always with his head in books, in studies, in that engineering. He would have sold everything at the first opportunity after I died. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if a stranger were sitting in my kitchen, using my husband's face, saying things Julian would never say. "How can you talk like that?" I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "How can you talk like that about your own son?" "I'm being realistic, Martha." He took a sip of the whiskey, making a face as the liquid burned going down. "Oliver was a good boy, but he wasn't the son I needed. Not to continue my legacy." It was as if something inside me finally broke. The last line that kept me tied to that man, to that marriage. Something beyond indignation, beyond anger. A crystalline revelation that the person in front of me was not just a man disturbed by grief, but someone fundamentally cruel, fundamentally wrong. "You're a monster," I said, the words coming out like stones from my throat. "A selfish monster who only cares about himself, about his precious legacy. Not for a second did you really grieve Oliver's death, did you? All you thought about was your store, your name, your vanity." He stood up so quickly that the chair fell backwards with a crash. His eyes, bloodshot from alcohol, fixed on mine with a fury I had never seen before. "Be careful what you say, Martha," he hissed, approaching me with faltering steps. Very careful. But something had changed inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me for months had transformed into a cold, crystalline anger that gave me a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. "Or what?" I challenged, taking a step toward him instead of backing away. "You'll hit me? You'll throw me out of the house? Do it. Anything would be better than continuing to live with someone like you." It was like flipping a switch. His face contorted into a mask of fury, his eyes almost bulging from their sockets, the veins in his neck visibly pulsing. "You ungrateful woman!" he roared, advancing toward me with his arm raised. "After everything I've done for you." The slap caught the side of my face with such force that I saw stars for a moment. I staggered backwards, my hand instinctively covering the area that had been hit, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth where I had bitten my own cheek. Julian stood still, looking at his own hand as if he didn't recognize what he had just done. In 32 years of marriage, with all his faults, he had never raised a hand to me. Never. "Martha," he began, his voice suddenly sober, regretful. "I didn't mean to. It was the alcohol. Don't touch me!" I screamed when he tried to approach, extending his hand toward my injured face. "Never touch me again." I backed up until I hit the drawers by the sink, my heart racing, my face burning, my whole body shaking with anger and fear. Julian continued advancing, arms extended in a gesture that was meant to be conciliatory, but which to me seemed only more threatening. "It was an accident," he insisted, his voice pleading now. "You provoked me, Martha. You said horrible things. I lost my head for a second." Stay away from me," I repeated, my eyes scanning the kitchen for something, anything I could use to defend myself if he advanced further. My hand found the drawer of utensils behind me. I opened it blindly, my fingers closing around the first object they touched, a kitchen knife, the one I used to cut meat, large, sharp. "Martha," there was a warning tone in his voice now, his eyes fixed on the knife I was holding. "Don't be ridiculous. Put that down and let's talk like adults." "We have nothing more to talk about," I replied, the knife firm in my hand, pointed at him. "It's over, Julian. Over in every possible way." He took a step forward, his hand extended as if he were going to take the knife from me. "You're not going anywhere, Martha. Not before tomorrow's appointment. Not before we resolve this baby issue." The way he said that, cold, authoritative, as if I were a property that had no right to decide about my own life, was the last straw. Something inside me, something that had been oppressed, silenced, subjugated for decades, finally freed itself in a primal cry of self-determination. "There will be no baby," I shouted, gripping the knife handle so hard that my knuckles turned white. "I'm not your slave. I'm not your property. I'm a person, Julian. A person who lost a child, who is suffering, who deserves respect. He laughed. A cold, disdainful sound that sent chills down my spine. Respect? What have you done to deserve respect, Martha? What are you without me? A housewife without education, without money, without anything. You are what I made you, and you'll do what I tell you to, or you'll find out what life is like without my protection. Each word was like a whip, each syllable a cruel reminder of how I had allowed my identity to be erased, my autonomy to be eroded year after year, decision after decision. I'd rather live under a bridge than continue one more day with you, I said, my voice surprisingly firm despite the tears streaming down my face. I tried to get past him, still holding the knife, determined to get my things, to leave that house, that life, no matter where to. But Julian blocked my path, his expression now a mask of contained fury. You're not going anywhere, he repeated, gripping my arm forcefully. Tomorrow we're going to that clinic, and you're going to smile, you're going to be the dedicated wife you've always been, and then we're going to come home and forget this ridiculous conversation. I tried to pull away, pulling my arm with all the strength I had. Let me go! It's over, Julian! Over! Everything happened very quickly after that. He pulled my arm harder, making me lose my balance. I fell against him, the knife still in my hand, pointed forward in an instinctive reflex of self-defense. I felt something give way, a momentary resistance followed by a frightening ease, like cutting butter, and then a wet warmth on my hand, running down my fingers, dripping onto the white tiled floor of the kitchen. Julian looked at me with wide eyes of surprise. He lowered his eyes to his own abdomen, where the knife had penetrated to the handle, and then back to me, a silent question on his lips that were beginning to turn pale. Martha? He murmured, his voice suddenly weak, confused, like that of a child waking from a nightmare. And then he fell, first to his knees, then to his side, his hand still clutching the knife handle as if he could prevent what had already happened, as if he could reverse the moment when our lives had changed forever, once again. Blood has a different color when it comes from someone you've loved for more than 3 decades. It's not red like in the movies. It's darker, almost black under the dim light of the kitchen. And the smell, metallic, strong, impossible to forget, even after so many years. I stood paralyzed, watching Julian on the floor, his breathing increasingly weak, the blood spreading around him like a macabre halo. Time stopped at that instant, as if the kitchen clock had frozen its hands. Help me, Martha, he whispered, his voice weak, his eyes pleading, so different from the cold, calculating eyes of minutes before. Please, my instincts took over. I grabbed the phone, dialed the emergency number with trembling fingers, staining the white device red. My husband. An accident. There's a knife. I could barely form complete sentences. 2473 Oak Street, Laurelhurst. Please, come quickly. I returned to Julian, kneeling beside him, not caring about the blood soaking my skirt. I held his hand, that same hand that minutes before had struck me, had threatened me. Now it was just the hand of a dying man, cold, trembling, seeking one last human contact. Hold on, I said through tears, the anger of moments ago transformed into pure terror. The ambulance is coming, his eyes, clouded by pain and shock, fixed on mine. The store, he murmured, and even there, on the verge of death, his obsession persisted. Promise you'll take care of the store. It was the last thing he said before closing his eyes. His hand, which squeezed mine with desperation, suddenly relaxed. His breathing, previously noisy and labored, ceased. When the ambulance arrived, 15 minutes later, Julian Maynard had already departed this world, taken by a kitchen knife and by the obsession that consumed him until his last breath. The paramedics attempted resuscitation, but it was too late. The police arrived soon after. I was taken to the station, still in shock, my hands and clothes stained with the blood of the man who, for more than 30 years, had been my husband. It was an accident, I repeated several times during the interrogation. He was assaulting me. I tried to defend myself. We stumbled. The detective, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes, someone who had seen it all in this life, looked at me with an expression that mixed doubt and compassion. Mrs. Maynard, "You need to understand the gravity of the situation," he explained, his voice calm but firm. "Your husband is dead. The knife was buried in his abdomen. We need to investigate what really happened." I was detained preventively. For the first time in my life, at 51, I spent a night in jail. A small, damp cell with a thin mattress on a concrete bed. I sat there, hugging my knees, looking at the peeling wall, trying to process how my life had turned into a nightmare in a matter of hours. The next morning, my sister Lucy arrived. She had traveled all night from Tacoma as soon as she heard what happened. She paid the bail, hired a lawyer, took me to her house. "We'll resolve this, Martha," she promised, holding my trembling hands as she drove. "You acted in self-defense. Anyone can see that." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Society judges harshly a woman who kills her husband, even in self-defense. And what would I say? That he wanted to force me to accept a baby that would be generated by another woman? That he was obsessed with the idea of replacing the son we lost? It sounded absurd even to me, who had lived through every minute of that nightmare. Julian's funeral was 3 days later. A small event, just the closest family, some friends, longtime customers of the store. I stayed at the back of the chapel, wearing a veil that covered my face, not so much for traditional mourning, but to hide from curious, judgmental looks. People whispered when I passed, "That's her, the woman who killed her husband. They say it was a fight over money." I heard he had a mistress. The rumors grew, distorted, increasingly far from the complex and painful truth. No one mentioned the years of control, the growing obsession with the store, the threats, the slap to the face. It was easier to create a simple story, a clear villain, than to understand the web of circumstances that led to that fatal night. The judicial process lasted almost a year. A year of hearings, testimonies, expert reports. A year in which my life was suspended, in which my every move was scrutinized, every word weighed. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, a patient man with gray hair and thick-framed glasses, built the defense around self-defense. Mrs. Maynard was being threatened, coerced, he argued in court. Her husband had physically assaulted her for the first time in 32 years of marriage. She feared for her life, reacted instinctively. It was a tragic accident, not a premeditated crime. The prosecution painted a different picture. A resentful wife, tired of a long marriage, wanting to get rid of her husband to inherit his estate. Mr. Julian Maynard was found with a knife in his abdomen, the prosecutor said, looking directly at me while speaking to the jury. A knife that the defendant admits she wielded. A knife that penetrated deep enough to cause fatal hemorrhaging. This is not an accident, ladies and gentlemen. It is homicide. The weeks in court dragged on, each day a new torture. I had to relive the worst moments of my life in public, expose the most intimate wounds to strangers who judged me without knowing the complete story. I spoke about Oliver's death, the change in Julian, the growing obsession with the store, the absurd plan to have another child. I spoke about the threats, the financial control, the isolation. I spoke about the slap, the knife, the fear I felt that night. Some people on the jury seemed moved, others skeptical. In our society, it's difficult to believe that a respected man, a known businessman, a father who lost his son, could transform into an abuser. It's easier to doubt the woman, question her motivations, her character. In the end, it was my sister Lucy's testimony that made the difference. She told about the desperate calls she received in the months prior. How I had reported the threats, the erratic behavior, the unhealthy obsession. How she had offered me shelter, begging me to leave that house before something worse happened. My sister was afraid, Lucy said, looking directly at the jurors. Not of being without money, not of losing status. She was afraid of her own husband, a man she no longer recognized, who had transformed into something frightening after the tragedy they experienced. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They were the longest 48 hours of my life. Sitting in the guest room of Lucy's house, I alternated between fervently praying and staring at the ceiling, going over every moment of that hellish year. When the verdict was read, I could barely breathe. In the case of the state versus Martha Maynard, this jury finds the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense. Self-defense. 2 words that gave me back my freedom, but not peace. Because deep in my heart, I knew the story was more complicated. It wasn't just survival instinct that guided my hand that night. It was also anger, frustration, the accumulation of years of silent submission that finally overflowed. I left the courthouse as a woman free in the eyes of the law, but carrying a new kind of prison within me. The guilt, the remorse, the unanswered questions. And now, how to rebuild a life at 52, widowed, marked by a scandal, known in the city as the woman who killed her husband? Lucy insisted that I stay in Tacoma. "Start over here," she said. "Away from the memories, away from the stairs." But something pulled me back to Portland. Perhaps the need to face the ghosts, to not run from the past, or perhaps, ironically, the store. That same store that was the center of Julian's obsession, the trigger for everything that happened afterward. As a widow, I inherited everything. The house, the assets, and yes, Maynard Fabrics. The place he loved more than anything, that he was willing to create a child just to have someone to leave it to. Now it was mine. I returned to Portland 2 months after the trial. The house was exactly as we had left it on that fateful night. Someone, probably Lucy, had cleaned the blood from the kitchen, but I could still see the phantom stain on the white tiles, could still smell the metallic scent in the air. I sold the house at the first opportunity. I couldn't live there, with those memories impregnated in the walls. I bought a small apartment near downtown, a place without history, without past. And then, in a gesture many considered madness, I reopened the store. Not out of greed, not out of financial necessity, but from a strange sense of duty, as if I needed to prove something, to Julian, to Oliver, to myself. Maynard Fabrics, the name remained the same. But everything else changed. I remodeled the space, hired young apprentices, created a small sewing school in the back for low-income women. I transformed that place that had been a symbol of obsession and tragedy into something positive, something that served the community. In the first few months, few customers appeared. The scandal was still fresh. People still whispered when I passed by. But gradually, the story was forgotten, replaced by other gossip, other dramas. Life moved on, as it always does. The years passed. The pain never completely disappeared. The loss of Oliver, the traumatic end of Julian, the emotional scars of the abuse I suffered. But I learned to live with it, to carry it as part of my story, not as something that completely defines me. The store prospered beyond what Julian ever imagined. It expanded to include a home decoration line, then personalized clothing. When I retired at 70, it was already a small chain with 3 locations in Portland. I passed the management to Kate, one of the first apprentices I hired, a talented woman who had escaped an abusive relationship and found refuge in work. "You saved my life," she told me on the day we signed the transfer papers. "You gave me purpose when I had nothing." I smiled, thinking of the irony. Perhaps we saved each other, Kate. Now at 79, I live a quiet life. My hair, once black as ebony, is now completely white. My hands, which once held a knife in desperation, now hold knitting needles, making caps and scarves to donate to the local nursing home. My heart, which was broken in so many different ways, still beats, still feels, still has the capacity to rejoice in small things. A bird at the window, a visit from a friend, a child's smile on the street. People who know me today, neighbors, young people from the parish, see only a nice lady, perhaps a bit reserved. They don't know about the storm I once was, the strength I needed to survive, the impossible choices I had to make. I carry my scars with dignity, without shame, without ostentation. They are part of who I am, silent witnesses to the fight I waged to recover my identity, my autonomy, my right to exist as a complete person, not as an extension of a man, not as a repository for others' dreams. If there's one lesson I've learned on this long journey, it's that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to say no to oppression, to raise your voice against abuse, to demand respect. Even when it seems that all doors are closed, even when fear paralyzes, even when the whole world seems to conspire against you, there is always a path to liberation, even if it's through the deepest darkness. My dear ones who have followed me through this difficult journey, Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this video from Grandparents' Tales, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave a comment telling us something about yourself. Perhaps the city you live in, how many children or grandchildren you have, or what touched you most about this story. May God bless each of you, illuminate your paths, and bring peace to your hearts. Remember, no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. It was like that for me, and it will be like that for you too. Until the next video,